Atticus Poon once said the past and the present, one feeds on the other. The two are inseparable. Now, he said that in Magpie Murders. You don't have to have watched that first series, Magpie Murders, to solve these mysteries in Moonflower Murders. I won't spoil the first series, but I believe there are some lessons we can take from the first series when we try to solve these mysteries. Number 1. A real-life person committing a crime does not necessarily mean their fictional counterpart committed a crime. And vice versa. If a fictional character is a murderer, it doesn't automatically mean their real-life inspiration is a killer. Number 2. A real-life person doesn't have to have a fictional counterpart, and a fictional character doesn't have to have been based on a real person. Number 3. The murder in real life and the murder in the novel could be mirror images of each other, or they could be completely unrelated. As detectives, we have to approach each case as independent, with independent suspects, motives, and clues. Let's solve Moonflower Murders, Episode 2. Susan checks into the Treherne Hotel and meets Lisa, Cecily's sister, and Aiden, Cecily's husband. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on the hunt to learn what happened to the missing daughter Cecily, and did the police arrest the correct person in the Frank Parris murder 8 years ago. Plus, in the novel Atticus Poon Takes the Case, who killed the actress Melissa James? Spoilers for the first 2 episodes of Moonflower Murders. If you haven't seen these first 2 episodes, pause this video, have a very awkward lunch with a client, and then come back and watch. Use the timestamps below to jump to the topic or suspect that you want to hear, and skip past things you don't want to hear. At the end of this podcast, I'll be reviewing some great feedback, but for now, let me cover an oversight I had on the last podcast. I listed the questions that I thought we needed to solve. Who killed Frank Parris if it wasn't Stefan? Why did Stefan confess if he didn't do it? Who killed Melissa James? And where is Cecily? I forgot there are other questions that we probably need to solve. If Stefan didn't kill Frank Parris, how did author Alan Conway know who did it? And again, if it wasn't Stefan, why didn't Alan Conway tell the police who did it instead of just leaving vague clues in his book, Atticus Poon Takes the Case? Help us out. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe if you're listening on audio podcast. We're having a drive for subscribers here at the end of 2024, and we need your support. Please, doesn't cost you anything. Just click that follow, subscribe button, and we'll be in your podcast ears whenever you want us. Before we run down the suspects in the real-life story, let's look at what Episode 2 taught us about our missing person, Cecily Treherne. We learn a lot about Cecily's life. When she was a child, Cecily gave her sister Lisa a scar on the side of her face because Cecily threw a broken glass at her. We also found out it may have been a shotgun wedding. Cecily was pregnant when she married Aiden. Sometime after Frank Parris was killed, Cecily and Aiden met the author Alan Conway, who came to the hotel and asked around about Frank Parris's murder. Cecily's job at the hotel is to manage the accounts. Cecily picked up that Atticus Poon book in a charity shop. As she was reading, she noticed her family in the book. She asked her husband to read it. She even thought about suing. Cecily kind of always had a belief that Stefan didn't kill Frank Parris. She and Aiden talked about it the morning she disappeared. She claimed she had found something. People believe Cecily went out to walk her dog Chase. Late that night, Chase came home, but Cecily didn't. Where do you think Cecily is? Let's hear it. Let's hear your theories. Go down on YouTube in the comments. Let's hear, where do you think Cecily is? Now there's the murder victim Frank Parris. He was in room 12 in the Moonflower Wing when he was murdered, and that room is no longer used as a hotel room, but they've turned it into a storage area. On the hallway where Frank's room was, there are 3 ways to exit or enter. One end of the hallway leads to the lobby, the other to an elevator, which brings you down to the hotel bar. A third way is to enter or exit via a fire escape, which leads to the outside. Now, Frank checked into the hotel on a Friday, and he had night manager Derek order him a taxi. And Derek somehow still knows, where, even though it's 8 years later, where that taxi went. It was to a law office of Sajid Khan. This is very interesting because if you have seen the first series, Sajid Khan is author Alan Conway's lawyer. Now let's look at the suspects in real life. We have our detective Susan Ryland. Susan mentions her sister Katie. If you didn't watch the first series, Magpie Murders, Susan's sister Katie, her boyfriend Andreas, and the author Alan Conway, they were all teachers at the same English school. Now Susan, she's blaming herself. She hates what Alan Conway did to the Treherne family in his book. And she kind of blames herself because 8 years ago, she was the one when they were talking about the details of Frank Parris' death. She told Alan, ooh, a hotel would be a good setting. She even liked the details of a death at a wedding. In the present, Susan has gotten to England from Greece. She's got her car out of storage. She drives past a bad sign, though, a tree with, I believe, 7 magpies. Uh-oh. Now, Susan herself is not staying in room 12 in the Moonflower Wing, but instead room 6. And to get there, you see, you come to this kind of the landing of a stairwell, where you can go to one side to the Moonflower and the other side to the Barn Owl Wing. Andreas. Susan's boyfriend stays in Greece. Now, Andreas did know Alan Conway. Does that mean he might have known Frank Parris? Where was Andreas 8 years ago? This episode taught us nothing. Cecily's father, hotel owner Lawrence Treherne. All these years later, he's still working the front desk, even though he made his children manage and run the hotel. Lawrence really defends his missing daughter Cecily and his son-in-law Aiden, but his daughter Lisa claims that he doesn't know either of those two. While she isn't in the episode, Cecily's mother Pauline is mentioned in that Lisa's rather direct, and we hear Pauline is rather direct as well. Pauline is staying at home right now. She isn't coming into the hotel. Cecily's sister, Lisa. Lisa is a frank-talking, hard-edged person, and she's also the general manager of the hotel. She really is looking down her nose at Susan. Lisa has a noticeable scar on her left cheek, and it should be noted that the actress Melissa James in the fictional world has the same scar but on the opposite cheek. Lisa used to live in a cottage on the hotel grounds, but she moved out, was she kicked out, when her sister and Aiden got married. Now, Lisa doesn't think much of her brother-in-law, Aiden. She calls him, quote, a fast mover. But she also doesn't think much of her sister, Cecily. She thinks Cecily is doing this for attention, and this is simply an argument between a husband and wife. We spend a lot of time with Cecily's husband, Aiden. Lawrence tells Susan that Aiden is miserable with Cecily missing. But when Susan sees him from her hotel room, he is putting on a good face. He's greeting his daughter Roxana in the car park with a smile and with love. We find out Aiden has been running the hotel's PR. According to Lisa, Aiden hit the jackpot when he married Cecily. He got a wife, a house, a job. But Lawrence argues Aiden was already successful. He was a successful real estate agent. He was living in a rich area of London. Now, Aiden tells the cops he thinks that people are holding his wife, and he's worried about making a public appeal because it might backfire. In these photos, we see Aiden has this odd tattoo on his back. Anybody know what that symbol is? Is it an A for Aiden? What is it? Now, Aiden says he and his wife did have some small arguments about her working too much at the hotel. He does blame the book, though, for his wife's disappearance. Now, even though Aiden is the basis of an ugly character in the book, unlike his wife, he didn't want to sue. He thought Alan Conway is dead, nothing they can do about it. People probably wouldn't even know it was him. Now, he claims the day his wife disappeared, he went to a meeting in Ipswich. This is a bit like in the fictional world. We need the detectives to check Melissa James's husband's alibi. Do we need to check Aiden's alibi? When Aiden got home from Ipswich, he didn't think anything had gone wrong until suddenly the dog, Chase, was at the door barking alone. He called Cecily's cell phone, he called the hotel, called her parents. No answers anywhere. Then he called the police. One thing is, Aiden seems easily distracted. He loses track of Susan's questions as he's paying attention to his daughter. And that daughter is Roxana. Don't call her Roxy. She's an 8-year-old. Apparently, she was conceived before the wedding. We have a new character in the real world this week. It's Derek's mother, so the night manager Derek's mother, Gwyneth, who, let's all pay attention, she apparently is the basis of a character in the novel, the housekeeper Phyllis. Gwyneth has been helping Cecily and Aiden raise their 8-year-old troublemaker Roxy. Gwyneth may have also been the last person to see Cecily alive. Now, Gwyneth's son Derek, again, he is the night manager, and he has nothing but nice things to say about Cecily and Aiden. Now, 8 years ago, he was on the desk. He wasn't on the front desk. He had this little desk at the bottom of the stairwell on the night that Frank Parris died. Derek isn't much of a party person. Even though everybody else was out at the party, he was sitting at his desk doing a crossword puzzle. Around midnight, he heard Chase the dog barking upstairs. He walked up there. He saw somebody walking through the hotel. He thought it was Stefan, but it was dark, and the person was wearing Stefan's woolly hat pretty low over their face. Plus, they had Stefan's toolbox. Now, Derek claims he didn't really like testifying against Stefan, but he did it. Derek likes Stefan so much, he says Stefan wasn't the one doing the petty theft at the hotel. Instead, it was Natasha the maid. Now, in the 8 years since the murder, that maid Natasha has left the hotel. She may have even left the country. We had a little scene of this character, Liam Corby, last week. This week we get a good scene with him. He's an Aussie, and he's managing the spa at the hotel. He's really reluctant to answer Susan's questions. Why? Doesn't he want Cecily back? He doesn't honestly think Cecily is coming back. She's been missing over a week, and he thinks it's because Cecily's upset. Now, about the Frank Parris murder, he said that's the only exciting thing that's ever happened at this hotel. While he claims to have been Stefan's friend, he says, listen, if the police say he did it, if the court say he did it, if Stefan said he did it, Stefan must have murdered Frank Parris. For a spa guy, he's a menacing figure, and boy, when he says massages are on the house, that's one of the most disturbing things you've ever heard. TripAdvisor, let's go. All these places getting bad TripAdvisor reviews. We have a brief look at police detective Locke. And that's a scene where Locke is visiting Aiden. Locke is the one who wants Aiden to do a public appeal for Cecily to come home. He's even already arranged for a television crew to come to Aiden's house and record it. 8 years ago, even though Derek said he didn't see Stefan's face completely, Detective Locke didn't care. He said, that's Stefan, it had to be him. Author Alan Conway. On her plane ride, Susan meets an Alan Conway fan who calls the author clever and assumes he was a lovely man. Susan recalls someone not quite so lovely. In fact, someone passive-aggressive to outright hostile towards her. Alan at the time wasn't ready to put out his third book. He was dismissive of the typical murder mystery, and he wanted to do something new. He was successful enough after these first 2 books that he was able to quit teaching at the school. In this meeting with Susan, Alan sees a newspaper announcing Frank Parris's death, and Alan almost contradicts himself. Of Frank Parris, Alan says, I once knew him, but then when Susan asks, was he a friend of yours? Alan replies, I hardly knew him. We know Alan interviewed Cecily and Aiden, but who else did he interview about the Frank Parris murder? And once again, why leave clues to the real killer in a book and not come forward and tell the police? All right, Governor, now it's time to put on your cap and go back to 1954 to the fictional village of Tawley. And let's look at the victim, Melissa James, and see what episode 2 taught us about her death. Now, Melissa, before she retired from acting, she had a great career. She was nominated for an Academy Award. There seemed to have only been a 10-minute window when Melissa could have been killed. We know she was on the phone with the doctor at 6:28. He was at her house by 6:38, and she was strangled in her bed. When she called the doctor, she claimed she was terrified. Someone was in the house. She was in danger. Now, this is just a theory, but are we sure this is Melissa and not a recording of her voice from one of her movies? Maybe a Hitchcock movie saying, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. The police believes that Melissa was downstairs when she called the doctor because there were tissues by the phone with her tears on them downstairs. But then she was found strangled upstairs in her bed by a telephone cord. There were signs of a struggle. The room was upset, and there were 2 different sets of abrasions around her neck. Not only that, she hit her head on the bedpost. Ugh, bad way to go. Now, according to the local police, she had fans who were upset that she'd given up acting. Maybe they killed her out of frustration. We heard about that letter written to the hotel in episode 1. Melissa, she was in money troubles, but at one point she didn't care because she bought her house at the same time as the hotel and paid twice the asking price for the house. Melissa has decorated this house with all signs of her Hollywood success. You see autographs of other movie stars, you see props and movie posters on her wall. She wanted everybody to know she was successful. Now, with that success, there may have been trouble. We find out she was going to the doctor often. Was she hooked on drugs? The doctor believes it's because of stress from the hotel losing money. He says the hotel was always full, but it never showed a profit. He also says Melissa believed she was being watched at her house. She thought things were being taken from her house. Again, at 6:28, she calls and says, he wants to kill me. Please don't leave me here all on my own. I don't know. He's still here. Oh my God, please hurry. He wants to kill me. Please hurry. Does that prove that the killer is a man? Okay, let's look at the suspects. Not really a suspect, but our lead detective, Atticus Poon, he's up first. Now, like all great fictional detectives, Atticus has to have a home base. Apparently, it's in flat number 4. Just like Sherlock Holmes had 221B Baker Street, Hercule Poirot had Whitehaven Mansions, this is Atticus Poon's place. It's certainly a less impressive place than we saw his offices in Magpie Murders, which takes place later in his life. Right now, business is slow. He's got no mysteries to investigate. A possible client just cancels their appointment, but conveniently, the Melissa James case comes up. Poon doesn't know how to drive. He hires a car. He's not a fan of modern machines. When he arrives at the Moonflower Hotel, they're going to put him up in the captain's room, which features furniture from the Marie Celeste, which apparently is Melissa James' second film. Atticus has a lot of questions about Melissa's phone call to the doctor. He thinks there's more to it, but we heard it. What else do you think is there? Go down in the comments. What do you think? Let us know. Unlike in Magpie Murders, which is a much later story in the series of Atticus Poon books, he doesn't have his secretary James Fraser. In this story, he's got a secretary, Madelaine Cain. And it's Miss Cain who's encouraging Atticus to take the case. It's going to help his profile to tackle a big case with a movie star. That said, Miss Cain, she's a little squeamish. When it gets to be a bloody discussion about Melissa James's death, she faints at the talk of blood. We have Melissa James' agent, Mr. Schultz. He works for the William Morris Agency in New York City. He flew from New York to London for Melissa James' funeral. He wants Atticus to investigate the death of his star, even though she had stopped acting. Is that suspicious? Now, Melissa turned down the role in Oscar Berlin's movie, but this agent believed that Melissa was going to make a comeback. In fact, this agent says nothing but positive things about Melissa James. There's Maureen Gardner. Again, she's one of the managers. This husband and wife are managing the Moonflower Hotel. She is working at the front desk when Atticus checks in, and note she handles the cash herself. In this episode, too, we don't see financial advisor Algernon Marsh, but we find out that some people believe he was the last person to see Melissa alive. We do spend more time with Algernon's sister, Samantha Collins. According to the local police, Samantha makes a mean cake. Ooh, I could use some of that cake. Samantha believes that Melissa James was taking advantage of her husband's generosity because she would always call, always have medical issues. Samantha was the one who answered that call at 6:28. Now, Samantha and her husband, something's going on with them. She really wants to leave town now that she's had this financial windfall. Her husband does too. She's still not willing to tell people. Maybe this is her husband doing it. We should assume she hasn't told her brother Algernon about it, but we also wonder why she's like, well, should we tell the cops about this windfall? Now her husband, Dr. Leonard Collins, he's like, no, don't worry about it. And again, he agrees with his wife. With all this money she's inherited, the two of them can escape this small town. The handyman at Melissa James's house, Eric, he doesn't appear in this episode, but what's funny is if you zoom in on this page that Susan is reading on the plane from Greece to England, Atticus Poon meets Eric, and he describes Eric as childlike. Again, there's Eric's mother, Phyllis, the housekeeper there. Phyllis says she's been working at the house ever since Melissa bought it. She told the police she and her son were out the night Melissa died. We have Melissa James's husband, John Spencer. In front of Atticus Poon, John is nothing but lovely words. He says he loved his wife more than anyone in the world. They met 6 years ago where she shot her last film. Is this the Hitchcock film? And apparently that film shot on his father's estate. Now he tells the cops he was at the opera that night, and he points the finger of suspicion at Lance Gardner, the hotel manager. John Spencer, kind of like the Collins, we don't have a real-life inspiration yet. What do you guys think? Is this gone girl? Did the husband do it? A new character in this episode is Detective Inspector Chubb, obviously based on Detective Locke in real life. Now, Chubb, just like Locke, they both appeared in Magpie Murders. But in this case, since this novel, Atticus Poon Takes the Case, was written before Magpie Murders, here we see Chubb and Poon meeting each other. The character Detective Chubb apparently is from Suffolk, but he claims he got married to a Devon girl and he moved here. One thing I think I can agree with him on, if someone has a lot of cake, take multiple slices. You only live once. You go, Chubb. Now let's get to your feedback. Temmie wrote, I'm so excited for this series. There's so many things to find out. For the murder of Frank Parris, my first suspect is Aiden. But in the novel, Melissa James's murder, gosh, it's too early for me to guess. That said, the Aiden counterpart, Algernon, is such a weird name. Is it an anagram for something? I put it in the wordfinder.com, and Algernon comes back as an 8-letter word, non-glare. I don't know if that'll help us solve it, but I love your feedback. We got this feedback from JK. They wrote, I like how Magpie Murders played fair with the mystery. Ooh, well, I think it did. We need this one to play fair too, JK. We got some great feedback from KNYC. Now, in the fictional world of the novel, when Melissa was murdered, we noticed jewelry on the floor. So does that mean Melissa's murder was not a robbery? We know a lot of people in this novel want money. Algernon probably wants money. Melissa James said her husband John wanted money. Do the people managing the Moonflower Hotel, the Gardners, do they need money? What do you guys think? If this was a crime of passion or a crime to cover up a crime of stealing from Melissa James? Our good buddy and occasionally my podcast co-host Peter in Australia wanted to know when these podcast episodes are going to drop. There's this odd reality where the episodes come out 6 days in the United States before they come out in the UK and probably the rest of the world. I'm still going to release my podcast the day after it comes out in the US, which means about 5 days before the UK and other countries can see it. But I'm going to try to make sure to have no spoilers in the thumbnails. You guys can always come and be safe. Got this great feedback from Rick Marshall. He says, remember, Frank Parris ended up in a room that was probably reserved for a guest for the wedding, not his original room. So did somebody go into that room that Frank Parris ended up in, expecting to see somebody else, expecting to kill somebody else? Ooh, great thought. Gen X Mind 67 wrote, my head is spinning. Oh, you are exactly right, Gen X. This adaptation was written by Anthony Horowitz, and in my mind, Magpie Murders, he kind of cut out some of the filler, some red herrings, so the show could breathe. Through 2 episodes, man, this thing is cooking. He is throwing out clues. He hasn't cut anything. He's trying to get all his clues and characters in there. Susan left this note, which is a great call. In the novel, Melissa James was perhaps making a call when she was killed. She had a telephone cord wrapped around her neck, for God's sake. While in real life, in the present, Cecily disappeared shortly after making a telephone call to her parents. Woo, so good. And finally, a great member of our Clue crew, Luca. He's writing in and gave us great feedback about how he's already read Moonflower Murders, so he can't get in and help solve it. But in our Magpie Murders videos, we had non-book reader Catfish try to solve it, and he was very excited about that. I'm sad to say that right when episode 1 of Moonflower Murders was coming out, our buddy Catfish had a bit of a health issue, which kind of took him away from podcasting for a bit. We have a good feeling that he's going to be fine and great, but just at that exact moment, and as I record this, he's still not 100% back. Detective Catfish can't wait to get back. Hey, if you have not read the book, we want to hear your theories. Go down into the YouTube comments. Let us know what you think. We'll be back next week looking at episode 3. In London, Susan investigates what Alan Conway knew about the Frank Parris murder. Talk to you next week.